Hello! The message from Australian Federal Police Commissioner Reece Kershaw rang out like a thunderclap. Though no specific names were mentioned, no one doubted that it was aimed squarely at one dangerous man, Mark Buttle. As the leader of the Comancheros gang, he once ruled over one of Australia's largest drug empires and lived a life of unimaginable luxury. However, ghosts from the past never let him go. A fateful incident in 2010 haunted Buttle, forcing him to abandon his glorious life and begin a tense journey of evasion. But ironically, it wasn't bloody schemes or tough rivals that brought him down. It was a careless slap on his wife's buttocks by a group of British tourists that truly shattered the empire of this powerful man. This is the story of Mark Buttle. Born in Maroubra, Australia in 1984, Mark grew up amidst hardship and turmoil. From a young age, he was drawn into a life of crime, frequently facing the harsh realities of prison. At 21, Mark joined the Notorious Comancheros motorcycle gang, an outlaw organization whose name alone could make people shudder. The gang wasn't just involved in drug smuggling, they were experts in extortion, contract killings, money laundering, and robberies. From the moment he joined, Mark harbored ambitions to rise through the ranks, to carve his name on the wall of power within the Comancheros. His opportunity came when Mick Howie, the gang's leader at the time, was arrested in March 2009 after a bloody brawl at the airport. This marked the beginning of Mick's reign faltering. But Mark still had to wait, as another feared figure, Dax Ngakuru, was chosen to lead, becoming the new commander of the gang. Mark's time had not yet come, but he knew it was only a matter of time before his chance would arrive. On the fateful morning of June 7th, 2010, 59-year-old Gary Alabon began his workday as usual. He had left home just 2 hours earlier, leaving behind a gentle and loving message for his wife, Monica. But no one could have known that this would be the last time Monica would see him. That morning, Gary and his colleague carried $300,000 to restock ATMs. Everything was going as planned, but fate was not on their side. 3 armed robbers stormed in, overwhelming both men and demanding they hand over all the cash. Without resistance, both Gary and his colleague complied, but then an unnecessary and brutal act occurred. Even though Gary had raised his hands in surrender and turned his back on the robbers, one of the cold-blooded criminals shot him in the back. The gunshot echoed ominously through the still morning, and Gary collapsed immediately before the killer stole his gun and fled with his accomplices in a silver Audi S8 waiting nearby. That shot ended the life of an innocent man and marked the beginning of a bloody and criminal chapter in the story of Mark Buttle. The gunshot rang out like thunder in the quiet morning. One single bullet, but enough to end Gary Alabon's life. He fell, with no chance to defend himself. In that horrifying moment, the cold-blooded killer bent down, taking Gary's gun, and he and his accomplices sped toward the waiting silver Audi S8. The fourth man gripped the steering wheel tightly, his face tense before the car sped off into the night, leaving behind a ruthless murder. Gary was rushed to Prince Alfred Hospital, but by the time he arrived, the battle between life and death had already ended. Monica, his wife, had no idea that just 3 hours after Gary left home, she would receive such a devastating shock. At 7 a.m., she turned on the TV and heard the news of a gun robbery and the brutal murder of a security guard. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over her as her intuition told her that her husband was gone forever. The most heartbreaking thing was that Gary had just 8 months left before retiring after 25 years of service. The Audi was later found completely burned, a grim testament to the cruelty and ruthlessness of the killers. Strangely, the car was torched not far from the Comancheros gang's headquarters, further raising suspicions that this was not just a random robbery. Such a bold act couldn't go unnoticed, and the police quickly offered a $100,000 reward for anyone with information that could help solve the case. Detective Superintendent Grant Taylor spoke with a mix of anger and determination. "We have a clear picture of what happened that day, and we almost know the identities of those masked men. But we need help from the community to strengthen the case. This wasn't a botched robbery. Gary Alabon complied with all their demands and was still coldly murdered." The story didn't end there. Just before 1 a.m. on December 29th, 2010, an emergency call alerted authorities to a raging fire on Coogee Bay Road. When police and firefighters arrived, Coogee Ink tattoo parlor was engulfed in flames. Fire burst through the windows, swallowing the entire shop in a fierce blaze, forcing nearly 30 neighbors to evacuate in panic. Police raided the apartment of a couple living next to the tattoo parlor, shouting, "Get out of here! Get out now!" Fortunately, firefighters managed to control the fire, and no one was injured. However, investigations later revealed that this was no accident. The tattoo shop's windows had been smashed before someone threw a Molotov cocktail inside. All evidence pointed to a targeted attack. The owners of the tattoo parlor were none other than Duax, Mark, and a third person, making it clear that this fire wasn't random. It was a calculated act of revenge aimed directly at them. To understand the reason behind this attack, we have to go back to 2008 when Alan Sarkis, leader of the Notorious gang, had his car blown up. It was believed to be retaliation by the Comancheros, sparking a never-ending war between the two gangs. Over the next 2 years, violence and bloodshed escalated relentlessly between the Comancheros and Notorious. Police suspected that the attack on the tattoo shop might have been revenged by Notorious, but no one has been charged. There were plenty of other enemies of the Comancheros, and these mounting rivalries eventually pushed Duax Dax and Gakuru, the gang's commander, to flee Australia for Turkey in 2011. As investigations closed in on Mark, he had no choice but to seize Duax's position of power. This time, Mark didn't miss the opportunity. He became the new commander of the Comancheros, and with this title, Mark believed he had reached the pinnacle of power. No one dared to oppose him, let alone insult his mother. But in the underworld, everything comes at a price, and Mark soon realized that absolute power was sometimes the beginning of the fall. In the early hours of December 18th, 2011, tensions flared at the Spearmint Rhino Club on King Street. Mark Buttle, the head of the Comancheros gang, was enjoying the late-night life with 3 friends, but within minutes, the lively atmosphere quickly turned violent. Exactly 10 minutes before 3 a.m., a brawl suddenly erupted. Mark, wearing a white shirt, was seething with rage after someone insulted his mother. Unimaginable words were exchanged, leaving him no choice but to dive into the fight. Within 2 minutes, a storm of punches and kicks rained down as Mark ruthlessly struck, leaving one opponent with 2 missing teeth, 3 others shattered, and another man with a broken arm. Screams echoed through the club's vibrant music, creating a chaotic scene that no one could forget. 2 weeks later, justice flashed on the horizon as the anti-gang strike force Raptor unit unexpectedly raided and arrested Mark in a dawn operation. In court, Mark was charged with public disorder, 2 counts of assault, and 1 count of causing intentional injury. However, he was granted freedom while awaiting the final sentencing. Mark's time as the Comancheros commander was anything but smooth. After just a year, rumors began to circulate in the criminal underworld, casting doubt on his leadership abilities. An insider's side, Mark is not like the previous leaders. His style is authoritarian, and there's no sense of unity among the members. This instability led to serious turmoil within the Comancheros. Members began attacking each other, and tragedy struck when Falo Paisu, a gang member, was killed. Just 2 days later, John Devine, Mark's cousin, was also shot, but luckily survived, leaving Mark facing more potential jail time. However, in 2013, the Comancheros began a new chapter in southern Sydney under the leadership of Muhammad Hijazi, one of the top members and considered a potential commander, while Mark endured imprisonment. On January 6, 2014, Mark was arrested again at Gold Coast, Queensland. He was wanted in connection with a brawl at Spearmint Rhino and for threatening a Queensland police officer and his family in 2012. A few months after his arrest, Mark was sentenced to at least 9 months in prison, with an additional 6 months of probation. His lawyer, Graham Turnbull, pleaded that Mark shouldn't be imprisoned, but the judge was resolute. It was revealed that Mark told the court he loved his young children and planned to propose to his girlfriend after his release, but fate wasn't on his side. Just 5 days after completing his probation, Mark was arrested again in July 2015. He, along with his girlfriend and daughter, devised a daring plan to leave Australia on a Bel Air B-20 King aircraft that he had rented for over $50,000. What seemed like a dream vacation, complete with a surprise beach proposal in Noumea, was perfectly planned. However, when the plane landed at Newcastle Airport for refueling and passport checks, the Australian Border Force decided to halt the flight and conduct a search. Contrary to what Mark had imagined, during the inspection, they discovered over $60,000 in undeclared cash in several bags. The penalty wasn't just a price for breaking the law, but also marked the end of the freedom dreams of a gang leader. He would now have to face the harsh reality of his poor life choices. The police arrived, and Mark was quickly charged with money laundering, as well as attempting to take more than $10,000 out of Australia without declaring it. Police records state that when questioned, Mark calmly responded, "My girlfriend filled out the declaration card. I only have 10 grand, and she has the rest." It was a somewhat ridiculous but clever excuse. After 2 months in prison, Mark was released again, but the troubles didn't stop there. Do you remember the innocent man named Gary Alabon, who was shot dead in the ATM robbery I mentioned earlier? After 6 years of investigation, no one had been charged, but police had announced that Mark was one of the prime suspects in the case. This made him feel threatened, and with no other choice, he decided to flee Australia, escaping from the shadow of crimes he hadn't yet committed. Mark's departure from the country caused a major upheaval within the Comancheros gang. A power vacuum formed, leading to division and hostility between members loyal to the old leadership and those seeking new power. For months, the police and strike force Raptor were on high alert as violence began erupting between gang members. In early 2017, a fight broke out between Ali Bazzi, Mark's right-hand man, and Mezen Chandab, another senior member of the Comancheros. This incident was like a bullet fired, prompting Mark to send an urgent message to all members. "I am the damn commander of the world. No one is to touch other members or form a new chapter without my permission. Ali will be in charge until I return." That message quickly stirred up trouble. Mezen Chandab, unable to tolerate the threat, decided to leave the gang, taking 20 other members with him. Tensions escalated further as the fear of a gang war between the Comancheros spread throughout Sydney, forcing the police and strike force Raptor to take more drastic actions than ever. They raided the homes of members and associates of the Comancheros, using weapons prohibition orders that allowed them to search without warrants. Meanwhile, Mark was enjoying a life of luxury and sunshine in Dubai, but that didn't stop him from getting involved in drug smuggling. In 2020, the price of certain drugs in Australia plummeted, causing Mark and other dealers' profits to take a nosedive. According to the Daily Telegraph, Mark decided to establish the Commission, modeled after Lucky Luciano's approach to create a mafia-style drug cartel aimed at controlling drug prices in the market. This group brought together many major drug dealers in Australia. Mark sent out warning and persuasive messages to all the major players in Australia and abroad, to all those operating in Sydney/NSW. As of 2021, a Sydney Commission will be formed. As you saw in 2020, the price of fry reached $250, and within 1 month, it dropped to $80K. This happened because there is no structure, no rules, no logic, and frankly, no meaning. Mark also proposed taxing major dealers for all drug shipments entering the country. In return, he promised that everyone could trade drugs safely, and prices would remain stable. The New South Wales police, while monitoring the situation, but noticed that drug prices were rising again, but couldn't confirm whether this was due to Mark's plan. Mark's journey continued, but the shadow of conflict and brutality loomed larger, awaiting his next steps in the treacherous world of crime. Mark's business seemed to be running smoothly, and everything appeared fine. But Mark Buttle was still Mark Buttle, a man who could never truly escape trouble. After 5 years living in Dubai, his life was suddenly upended by an unexpected incident. A drunken British tourist dared to slap his wife, Mel, on the bottom. Mark's rage exploded, completely understandable. But in Dubai, where the law is strict, no one can easily escape trouble. To avoid prosecution, Mark chose to flee to Turkey and later settled in northern Cyprus, a place only recognized by Turkey and with no extradition treaty with Australia. You might think this would be a safe haven, but the story doesn't end there. On July 9th, 2022, Mark was arrested on the island and immediately extradited to Turkey. A cold statement from Northern Cyprus Ministry of Interior announced the decision to deport Mark Buttle, who was deemed a threat to the peace and security of our people, was made on Friday. However, Mark and his lawyer claimed that politicians forced him to pay money. He bribed them for his freedom there, but they kept demanding more. The vicious cycle of corruption and injustice trapped him in an endless battle. By August 2022, Mark was deported from Turkey back to Australia, where he was immediately arrested on charges of smuggling 160 kilograms of cocaine worth 40 million Australian dollars into Melbourne in May 2021. Court documents also revealed that Mark was accused of conspiring from March 19th to June 3rd, 2021 to traffic a massive quantity of drugs across borders. Each of these charges could lead to a life sentence, a bleak prospect for Mark. As for the Gary Alabon case, it remains unclear whether Mark will face any consequences from that incident. The reward for information related to the case increased from 100,000 Australian dollars to 1 million Australian dollars in 2020, but by 2024 no one had been charged. Mark's life is on the brink of collapse, and the tension in the underworld is building like a storm ready to explode.
Monzer Al-Kassar is considered one of the 3 most notorious arms dealers of all time. He dressed in fashionable suits and bore a respectable appearance, but behind this facade was the power to sustain entire wars. While Victor Bout was known as the Merchant of Death, Monzer Al-Kassar had a more elegant nickname, the Prince of Marbella. Yet he had more than one alias. The USA Senate labeled him as one of the world's biggest arms and drug traffickers. The Iraqi government called him a notorious terrorist, and journalists dubbed him the godfather of extremists. So, who is Monzer Al-Kassar, and how did he manipulate wars? If you are a fan of crime movies and believe that kingpins must come from a rough background, or have gone through life and death struggles to become ruthless, reality might surprise you. If you read Monzer Al-Kassar's background, you might find it hard to believe that he became such a notorious arms dealer. Kassar was born on July 25, 1935 in Al-Nabq, Syria, into a prestigious family. His father was a high-ranking official in the Syrian government under President Hafez al-Assad, having served as Syria's first ambassador to India and later to Canada. Monzer Al-Kassar was fluent in 5 languages, held 3 passports, and graduated with a law degree in Rome, Italy. This is the background of the man who would be known as the godfather of extremists. With a prestigious family, excellent education, and financial resources, what led Monzer Al-Kassar down the path of crime? Perhaps it was passion, something he mentioned in an interview with journalist Manfred Morin, the author of The Godfather of Terror. After graduating with a law degree in Rome, Italy in 1960, instead of pursuing a legal career, Monzer Al-Kassar chose the path of drug trafficking. In 1970, he was arrested in Copenhagen, Denmark for trafficking cannabis, but was not prosecuted. Kassar then moved to England, where he lived in an apartment in Sloane Square, London, and continued dealing not only cannabis, but other drugs as well. However, it wasn't until 2 years later that Kassar truly found his niche in the arms trade, which seemed like a predestined path. In early 1972, a contact in Lebanon, who supplied cannabis and other drugs to Monzer Al-Kassar, approached him with a request. Could Kassar help a rebel group in Lebanon purchase some weapons? Kassar began researching the arms market and supply sources through his father's connections, and he agreed to carry out the deal. He subsequently delivered a shipment to the group in Lebanon, including 400 AK-47 rifles, 100 RPG anti-tank weapons, and 200 grenades, which Kassar sourced from Poland through the Black September organization. By 1988, shortly after taking off, a Pan Am passenger plane en route from London to New York crashed over Lockerbie, Scotland. All 243 passengers, 16 crew members, and 11 people on the ground were killed as the wreckage fell on the town of Lockerbie. Most of the passengers and crew were USA citizens. The subsequent investigation revealed that the bomber was Abdelbassat Mohammed Ali al-Makrahi, a Libyan intelligence officer, and that the explosives used to make the bomb were supplied by Kassar. However, due to a lack of evidence, Kassar escaped conviction. After his spectacularly successful deals, Kassar officially entered the black market arms trade and became famous under the nickname the Prince of Marbella. However, governments often referred to him as the godfather of extremists, and they had good reasons for doing so. One of the incidents directly involving Kassar occurred in October 1985 when 4 members of the Palestine Liberation Front hijacked the Italian cruise ship Achille Lauro and took dozens of hostages while it was docked in Egypt. The group demanded that Israel release all members of the Palestine Liberation Organization being held in detention. When Israel refused, the hijackers killed Leon Klinghoffer, a Jewish USA man who was wheelchair-bound after a stroke, and threw his body overboard. After extensive negotiations mediated by Egypt, the 4 members of the Palestine Liberation Front agreed to release the ship and the hostages in exchange for a plane to fly them to Tunis. However, as the plane entered Italian airspace, 2 USA fighter jets intercepted it and forced it to land at the Milan airport in Italy. After being captured and brought to trial, all 4 members confessed that Kassar had supplied the weapons and planned the hijacking. Yet once again, due to a lack of concrete evidence, Kassar was released after nearly a year of detention. Upon hearing this news, Abu Abbas, then the leader of the Palestine Liberation Front, said, "No one can call him an extremist. He is a hero in the eyes of the Arab people. I will not allow anyone to call Kassar an extremist." Continuing in 1986, a French court sentenced Kassar in absentia to 8 years in prison for supplying weapons to the Palestinians to assassinate officials in Europe. However, this sentence was never enforced, as when the world's most notorious arms dealer spoke, no one dared to defy him. During this time, USA President Ronald Reagan gave the green light to secret arms sales to Iran. After the Iran-Iraq War, a USA Congress-approved arms embargo was imposed on Iran, but immediately, $15 million was added to Monzer Al-Kassar's account. The funds from these arms sales were then funneled to the Contras, a counter-revolutionary group in Nicaragua, to help rescue USA hostages held in Lebanon. As the arms dealer gained approval, money flowed into Kassar's pockets exponentially, and before he was arrested, he had amassed a fortune of $26 billion by 1980s standards. Adjusted for current inflation, this fortune would be nearly $100 billion, but even that figure may not be the final tally. In 1992, Kassar once again made tens of millions of dollars by selling arms to Croatia, Bosnia, and Somalia in violation of the United Nations Security Council's arms embargo on these 3 nations. Additionally, Kassar sold weapons to Chad, Guatemala, Iran, Lebanon, Sri Lanka, Syria, and Yemen. To ensure his safety, Kassar contacted former Argentine President Carlos Menem and received a passport proving his Argentine citizenship. Prosecutors at the International Court of Justice in The Hague stated that it was difficult to find Kassar's criminal records in any country. Meanwhile, Kassar nonchalantly declared, "Where there is money, there is me. In business, I have met many interesting people, both good and bad, but how do you know who is good and who is bad? It's just a matter of perspective. Someone who is bad to you may be good to me, so don't call me bad, just because I associate with bad people." Also in that year, luck smiled upon Kassar once again in Spain. Judge Baltasar Garzon, who led the investigation into the extremist activities of the Basque separatist group, found evidence to charge Kassar with supplying arms to the group. However, just before the trial was set to begin, one member of the ETA group in Madrid and 3 other witnesses who had agreed to provide evidence against Kassar met untimely fates. One person died from a fall from the 4th floor, another was killed in a car accident, and the third mysteriously disappeared. After Iraqi President Saddam Hussein was overthrown, the new Iraqi government issued a red notice for Kassar due to his previous sale of weapons to Saddam Hussein's Republican Guard. However, Kassar showed no fear. On the contrary, he continued selling arms to anti-government forces in Iraq. Muwaffaq al-Rubai, Iraq's national security advisor, called Kassar one of the main financiers of the Iraqi insurgents, and asserted that Iraq had sufficient evidence of his criminal activities. At that time, one of the key figures leading insurgent groups in Iraq was Sabawi Ibrahim al-Hassan Ali Tikriti, Saddam Hussein's cousin. Under Saddam's regime, Sabawi was the commander of Iraq's intelligence agency and a close friend of Kassar. After Saddam's overthrow, Sabawi became the fifth most wanted person on the new Iraqi government's list. In early April 2005, the United Nations ordered the seizure of assets belonging to Sabawi Ibrahim al-Hassan Ali Tikriti and his 6 sons for financing former regime loyalists and insurgent groups to carry out attacks against the Iraqi government and the USA-led coalition. In 2001, the 9/11's terrorist attacks in the USA dramatically altered the country's foreign policy. USA laws were amended to allow the capture of suspects hiding and operating abroad to be brought to trial in federal courts. This paved the way for the USA Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, to plan the capture of Monzer Al-Kassar in 2006. Similar to the operation that captured the Merchant of Death Victor Bout, the DEA orchestrated a sting operation codenamed Operation Legacy, carried out by the agency's Special Operations Division under the command of Jim Soils. After connecting with a former member of the Black September organization codenamed Samir, Kassar eventually agreed to meet Samir in Beirut, Lebanon in February 2007. At this meeting, 2 Guatemalans posing as members of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, were introduced, claiming to be seeking weapons to fight against USAs in Colombia. After several contacts and negotiations, Kassar agreed to sell FARC 15 shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles, 4,000 grenades, 9,000 AK-47 rifles, and 300 kilograms of C4 explosives. In exchange, FARC would pay Kassar with cocaine worth $15 million. All of these meetings were secretly recorded by the DEA. The DEA then proposed that the fake FARC group persuade Kassar to travel to Romania to receive the cocaine as planned. With the approval of the Romanian government, the DEA intended to arrest Kassar in Bucharest. However, Kassar declined, citing the difficulty of finding transportation and a route to move the cocaine out of Romania. Undeterred, on June 3, 2007, the DEA instructed the fake FARC group to convince Kassar to come to Madrid, the capital of Spain. This time he agreed, perhaps because it was where his Marbella castle was located. During a secret meeting at the castle, 2 undercover agents, Carlos and Luis, equipped with recording devices by the DEA, recorded the conversation. Kassar remained cautious, probing Luis and Carlos's knowledge of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. Eventually, he agreed to sell them over 12,000 weapons, including surface-to-air missiles. FARC intended to use these missiles to shoot down USA military helicopters. The deal also included Kassar's proposal to supply 1,000 additional weapons, such as bombs and air-to-ground missiles for fighter jets to strengthen the Colombian armed forces, along with explosives and a training package on how to use them. Kassar demanded that the $4.4 million payment for the weapons be made in installments. Once the deal was set, the DEA aimed to arrange the exchange at a location where extraditing him to the USA would be easiest. According to the plan, Luis and Carlos told Kassar that a high-ranking member of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, would come to finalize the payment. However, this leader required a face-to-face meeting to ensure that Kassar would honor the deal. Luis and Carlos suggested meeting in Romania, but Kassar refused, feeling uneasy about leaving Spain. Instead, the meeting was arranged at Madrid's international airport, and Kassar agreed, believing the location would allow him to escape quickly if things went wrong. Spanish police, along with DEA agents, positioned themselves throughout the airport, ready for the arrest. However, as soon as Kassar landed at the airport terminal, the DEA agents suddenly lost sight of him. After a few tense minutes, the agents breathed a sigh of relief when they saw Kassar emerge from the airport restroom. The police swiftly moved in, restrained him, and placed him in handcuffs. He was quickly transferred onto a jet arranged by the DEA and flown back to the USA. On November 20th, 2008, Kassar was sentenced by a USA federal court to 30 years in prison and had all of his assets confiscated. He was convicted of charges including smuggling surface-to-air missiles to terrorists, conspiring to kill USA, drug trafficking, and money laundering. Now, 72 years old, Kassar is serving his sentence at a federal prison in Marion, Illinois, about 300 miles from Chicago. He is not eligible for parole until 2033, when he will be 88 years old. The once glorious arms-dealing career of Monzer Al-Kassar did not end safely like Victor Bout's. As John Travolta's character in Lord of War, portrayed by Nicolas Cage, once said, "I was the right hand of some despicable people who called themselves leaders." While the most notorious arms dealer in the world, my boss, the President of the USA, shipped more weapons in a day than I could in a year, sometimes hesitant to get involved with guns, but sometimes he needed a free agent like me to supply the forces he couldn't directly. So you call me the devil, but sadly, I'm a useful devil. What do you think of this story? Leave your thoughts below for everyone to see. Don't forget to like and subscribe to support me. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.